The morning sun cast long shadows across the military base as Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez adjusted her uniform for what felt like the 100th time. At 28, she had already served 8 years in the United States Marine Corps, but today felt different. Today, she would be attending a joint military ceremony that would bring together officers from all branches of the armed forces, including some of the highest-ranking officials in the Navy. Maria had always been known for her quick wit and humor among her fellow Marines. It was a trait that had gotten her through some of the toughest training exercises and deployments overseas. Her colleagues often said she could make anyone laugh, even in the most stressful situations. But what they didn't know was that beneath her confident exterior, Maria sometimes struggled with feeling overlooked in a military hierarchy that seemed dominated by men and higher ranks. As she walked toward the ceremony venue, Maria's mind wandered to her journey in the Marines. She had enlisted straight out of high school, driven by a desire to serve her country and prove that a young woman from a small town in Texas could make it in one of the toughest military branches. Her parents had been worried, but they knew better than to try to talk their determined daughter out of anything once she had set her mind to it. The early years had been challenging. Basic training at Paris Island had pushed her to her physical and mental limits. She remembered the drill instructors shouting commands, the endless physical exercises, and the constant pressure to prove herself worthy of wearing the Marine uniform. Many recruits had dropped out, but Maria had persevered, drawing strength from her determination to succeed. After completing her initial training, Maria had been assigned to various bases across the country and had even served overseas in Afghanistan. Each assignment had taught her something new about leadership, teamwork, and the importance of maintaining her sense of humor even in the darkest moments. She had seen combat, lost friends, and experienced the brotherhood that only exists among those who have served together in dangerous situations. Despite her accomplishments, Maria often felt like she was invisible to the higher-ranking officers. She was competent, reliable, and well-respected by her peers, but she rarely received recognition from the top brass. This feeling had become more pronounced recently as she watched some of her male colleagues receive promotions and special assignments that seemed to pass her by. The ceremony venue was an impressive auditorium that could seat over 1,000 people. As Maria entered, she was struck by the formal atmosphere and the sea of uniforms representing different military branches. Navy officers in their dress blues sat alongside Army personnel in their formal greens, while Air Force members added splashes of lighter blue to the crowd. The Marine contingent, including Maria, stood out in their distinctive dress blue uniforms with their characteristic red trim. Maria found her assigned seat among the other staff sergeants and took a moment to observe the distinguished guests seated at the front of the auditorium. She recognized several high-ranking officials from photographs she had seen in military publications, but 3 figures in particular caught her attention. 3 men in Navy uniforms sat in the front row, their uniforms adorned with so many ribbons and insignia that even from a distance, it was clear they held positions of extreme importance. As the ceremony began, Maria learned that these 3 men were admirals, among the highest-ranking officers in the United States Navy. Admiral James Patterson was a veteran of 3 decades who had served in multiple conflicts and was known for his strategic brilliance. Admiral Robert Chen had risen through the ranks as a naval aviator before transitioning to command positions, earning respect for his innovative approaches to modern naval warfare. Admiral Michael Thompson was the youngest of the 3, but his rapid promotion through the ranks was a testament to his exceptional leadership abilities and his role in several successful military operations. The ceremony proceeded with various presentations, speeches, and recognitions. Maria listened politely, but her attention began to wander as speaker after speaker took the podium to discuss military strategy, budget allocations, and policy changes. The formal nature of the event was beginning to feel overwhelming, and Maria found herself missing the more relaxed atmosphere of her regular duties. During a brief intermission, Maria struck up a conversation with a fellow staff sergeant seated next to her. Sergeant First Class David Kim from the Army had served for about as long as Maria and shared her slightly irreverent sense of humor. As they chatted quietly, their conversation turned to the impressive array of high-ranking officers present at the ceremony. "Look at all those stars and stripes," David whispered, nodding toward the front rows. "I bet there's enough rank up there to command half the world's military forces." Maria glanced toward the front of the auditorium where the 3 admirals sat. Those Navy guys in the front row look like they could probably order around entire fleets with a simple phone call, she replied quietly. Admirals, David confirmed. I heard someone mention they're all 3-star and 4-star level. That's some serious rank right there. Maria nodded, but something about the conversation sparked her mischievous side. She had always been the type to find humor in formal situations, and the overwhelming display of military hierarchy was beginning to feel ripe for some lighthearted commentary. Without really thinking about the consequences, she decided to make a joke that would soon change her life in ways she could never have imagined. You know what's funny about all this rank? Maria said, speaking just loud enough for several nearby service members to hear. Here I am, a staff sergeant in the Marines, and I'm sitting here looking at all these admirals and generals thinking about how they probably don't even know I exist. I bet if I stood up right now and saluted, they wouldn't even notice. The comment drew a few chuckles from the Marines and soldiers within earshot. Someone else added their own joke about the military hierarchy, and soon a small group of enlisted personnel were quietly sharing stories and observations about their experiences with high-ranking officers. I dare you to try it, joked Corporal Williams, another Marine who had overheard Maria's comment. Stand up and give them a salute, see if they even look in your direction. Maria laughed and shook her head. Right, like I'm going to randomly salute some admirals in the middle of a ceremony. That would probably get me court-martialed for improper military conduct. But, even as she dismissed the suggestion, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that her comment had touched on something deeper. The vast gulf between enlisted personnel and flag officers sometimes felt insurmountable, and moments like this ceremony only seemed to reinforce the distance between the ranks. As the ceremony resumed, Maria tried to focus on the proceedings, but her mind kept returning to her earlier conversation. She thought about all the Marines she had served alongside who had performed heroically without recognition, all the small acts of courage and dedication that went unnoticed by the higher command structure. The speaker at the podium was discussing the importance of recognizing excellence at all levels of military service, which seemed ironic given Maria's current train of thought. She wondered how many of the enlisted personnel in the audience had stories of bravery, sacrifice, or exceptional service that would never make it to the attention of the flag officers seated in the front rows. Maria's reverie was interrupted by an unexpected announcement from the ceremony moderator. Due to a scheduling change, there would be an extended break before the final portion of the ceremony. The audience was invited to move around, visit refreshment stations, and network with colleagues from other branches of service. As people began to stand and mingle, Maria realized that this break might provide an opportunity to continue her earlier conversation with David and some of the other enlisted personnel she had met. But, as she stood up from her seat, she had no idea that her casual joke about saluting the admirals was about to become much more than just a humorous comment among friends. The break would prove to be a turning point, not just in the ceremony, but in Maria's entire military career. Sometimes the smallest moments, the most casual comments, and the most unexpected encounters can change everything. And, for Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, that change was about to begin in the most surprising way possible. As she walked toward the refreshment area, Maria caught a glimpse of the 3 admirals standing near the front of the auditorium, engaged in what appeared to be a serious conversation. She had no way of knowing that within hours, these same men would be standing and saluting her, transforming her casual joke into a profound moment of recognition that would be remembered long after the ceremony had ended. The stage was set for an extraordinary encounter between a staff sergeant who felt invisible and 3 of the most powerful officers in the United States Navy. What happened next would prove that sometimes, the military hierarchy works in ways that nobody expects, and that true leadership recognizes excellence regardless of rank or position. During the extended break, Maria made her way to the refreshment area, where small groups of service members from different branches had gathered to chat and network. The atmosphere was more relaxed now, with the formal ceremony temporarily suspended, and conversations flowed more freely among the assembled military personnel. Maria grabbed a cup of coffee and found herself standing near a group that included several junior officers and senior enlisted personnel. The conversation had naturally turned to their various experiences in the service, and Maria found herself sharing stories about her deployments and the challenges of being a woman in the Marine Corps. The thing that gets me sometimes, Maria said, taking a sip of her coffee, is how disconnected the whole system can feel. You can serve for years, do your job well, lead your people effectively, and still feel like you're completely invisible to anyone above the rank of colonel. A Navy petty officer nodded in agreement.
I know what you mean.
I've been in for 12 years, and I've maybe had 3 conversations with anyone above commander level.
Sometimes you wonder if they even know we exist.
That's what I was joking about earlier, Maria continued, her natural storytelling ability drawing the group's attention. I was looking at those 3 admirals sitting up front and thinking about how they probably have no idea who any of us are. I mean, they're probably focused on big picture strategy and global operations while we're down here actually implementing their decisions on the ground level. As Maria spoke, she noticed that their small group had attracted the attention of a few other service members, including a Navy commander who had been standing nearby. Commander Sarah Mitchell was a career naval officer who had worked her way up through the ranks over 20 years of service. What Maria didn't know was that Commander Mitchell had a unique perspective on the senior leadership she was discussing. Commander Mitchell had served as an aide to high-ranking officers earlier in her career and had observed how flag officers actually viewed and interacted with enlisted personnel. She also knew something about the 3 admirals that Maria was referencing that might surprise the young Marine.
Excuse me, Commander Mitchell said, approaching Maria's group. I couldn't help but overhear your conversation about senior leadership. Mind if I join you?
Maria immediately straightened slightly, recognizing the commander's rank, but Mitchell's casual tone put her at ease.
Of course, ma'am. We were just discussing the gap between senior officers and enlisted personnel.
I heard you mention the 3 admirals, Commander Mitchell said, nodding toward the front of the auditorium.
Admiral Patterson, Admiral Chen, and Admiral Thompson. Have you heard much about their backgrounds? Maria shook her head. Just what was mentioned in the ceremony program. They're all pretty high-ranking, obviously. Commander Mitchell smiled.
They are indeed, but what you might find interesting is that all 3 of them came up through the enlisted ranks.
Admiral Patterson started as a seaman recruit 32 years ago. Admiral Chen began his career as an aviation electrician's mate. And Admiral Thompson actually started as a hospital corpsman before becoming an officer.
The group around Maria fell silent, absorbing this information. Maria felt a slight flush of embarrassment as she realized that her assumptions about these senior leaders might have been completely wrong. What I'm saying, Commander Mitchell continued, is that those 3 men probably understand the enlisted experience better than most flag officers. They've been where you are, they've felt the frustration you're describing, and they've worked their way up through the same system you're navigating now. Maria processed this information, feeling somewhat chastened by her earlier comments.
I had no idea. I guess I just assumed they had always been officers.
It's a common misconception, Commander Mitchell replied kindly.
But here's something else you might not realize.
Senior officers, especially those who came up through the ranks, are always looking for exceptional enlisted personnel. They remember what it was like to feel invisible, and they make it a point to recognize excellence when they see it. As if summoned by their conversation, a young naval officer approached the group. Lieutenant Jason Parker served as an aide to Admiral Patterson and had been circulating through the crowd during the break, observing interactions and gathering information for his boss.
Excuse me, Lieutenant Parker said, addressing Commander Mitchell. Admiral Patterson has asked me to gather some information about the enlisted personnel attending today's ceremony.
He's particularly interested in hearing about Marines who have shown exceptional leadership and service. Maria felt a moment of panic, wondering if somehow her earlier comments had been reported to the Admiral's staff. But Commander Mitchell placed a reassuring hand on her arm. Lieutenant Parker, Commander Mitchell said, I'd like you to meet Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, United States Marine Corps. We were just discussing her experiences and perspectives on military leadership. Lieutenant Parker turned his attention to Maria, his expression professional but interested.
Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, could you tell me a bit about your background and service record?
Maria straightened and gave a brief summary of her 8 years in the Marine Corps, including her deployments, her current assignment, and her leadership responsibilities. She tried to keep her voice steady, still uncertain about why this information was being gathered.
"Thank you, Staff Sergeant," Lieutenant Parker said, making notes on a tablet.
Admiral Patterson has a particular interest in the perspectives of senior enlisted personnel, especially those with combat experience and leadership responsibilities. After Lieutenant Parker moved on to speak with other service members, Maria turned to Commander Mitchell with a puzzled expression.
"What was that about?"
"I'm not entirely sure," Commander Mitchell replied, "but I know that Admiral Patterson makes it a point to connect with enlisted personnel whenever possible. He never forgot where he came from, and he actively seeks opportunities to recognize and mentor promising young leaders." The break continued, and Maria found herself in several more conversations with officers and enlisted personnel from various branches. She noticed that word seemed to be spreading about her background and experiences as more people approached to introduce themselves and chat about military service. Unknown to Maria, Lieutenant Parker had reported back to Admiral Patterson about his conversation with the Marine Staff Sergeant. The Admiral had listened with interest as his aide described Maria's service record, her leadership experience, and the thoughtful way she had discussed military hierarchy and the challenges facing enlisted personnel. Admiral Patterson had then shared this information with Admirals Chen and Thompson, and the three men had discussed the importance of recognizing exceptional enlisted leaders. They had all remembered their own experiences as junior enlisted personnel and the senior officers who had taken the time to acknowledge their potential. As the break neared its end, Maria noticed increased activity among the senior officers' staffs. Aides were moving back and forth, apparently coordinating something, but she couldn't determine what was happening. Commander Mitchell, who had remained near Maria's group throughout the break, seemed to be receiving some kind of information through discreet communications with other officers. Maria noticed her checking her phone several times and exchanging meaningful glances with some of the other senior personnel.
"Is everything okay, ma'am?"
Maria asked, noticing Commander Mitchell's apparent distraction. "Oh yes, everything's fine," Commander Mitchell replied, but her smile suggested she knew something that she wasn't sharing.
"I think the remainder of the ceremony is going to be quite interesting."
As the break concluded and service members began returning to their seats, Maria felt a strange mixture of anticipation and nervousness. The interactions during the break had been unexpected and had challenged some of her assumptions about military leadership, but she still had no idea what was about to happen. The three admirals had returned to their seats in the front row, and Maria noticed that they seemed to be engaged in quiet but animated conversation. Admiral Patterson occasionally glanced back toward the enlisted seating area, though Maria couldn't tell if he was looking in her direction specifically. As the ceremony moderator called for everyone to take their seats for the final portion of the event, Maria settled back into her chair, her mind racing with thoughts about the conversation she had just experienced. She felt somewhat embarrassed about her earlier joke about the admirals not knowing she existed, especially now that she knew about their backgrounds as former enlisted personnel. The final portion of the ceremony was about to begin, and Maria had no way of knowing that her casual comment about saluting the senior officers was about to become a reality in the most unexpected and meaningful way possible. The stage was set for a moment that would not only validate her service and dedication but would also demonstrate the true nature of military leadership and recognition. As she waited for the ceremony to resume, Maria reflected on the conversations from the break and realized that perhaps the gap between senior leadership and enlisted personnel wasn't as wide as she had assumed. The revelation about the admirals' backgrounds had opened her eyes to the possibility that excellent leadership could come from anywhere in the military hierarchy, and that true leaders never forgot where they came from. What she was about to discover was that those same leaders were always watching, always evaluating, and always ready to recognize excellence wherever they found it, regardless of rank or position. The next few minutes would prove that sometimes the military works exactly as it should, honoring those who serve with distinction and dedication. As the final portion of the ceremony began, the moderator took the podium with an announcement that immediately captured everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special recognition segment that was added to today's program. Admiral Patterson will be presenting an impromptu award for exceptional enlisted leadership." Maria felt her stomach drop as she wondered if her earlier comments had somehow gotten her into trouble. She glanced around nervously, noticing that several other enlisted personnel seemed equally uncertain about what was happening. Admiral Patterson rose from his seat and walked to the podium with the confident bearing of a man who had commanded respect for over 3 decades. His uniform was immaculate, decorated with ribbons that told the story of a distinguished naval career spanning multiple conflicts and assignments around the world. "Thank you," Admiral Patterson began, his voice carrying clearly throughout the auditorium. "As many of you know, I began my career 32 years ago as a seaman recruit. I've never forgotten the challenges, frustrations, and aspirations of enlisted service members because those experiences shaped who I am as a leader today." The auditorium was completely silent as the Admiral continued. "During today's break, I had the opportunity to learn about many of the outstanding enlisted personnel present at this ceremony. One individual story particularly impressed my colleagues and me, not just for her record of service, but for her thoughtful perspective on military leadership and her ability to articulate the experiences of enlisted personnel." Maria's heart began racing as she realized that the Admiral was describing her conversation from the break. She looked around desperately, hoping that somehow he was talking about someone else, but Commander Mitchell, who was seated a few rows ahead, turned and gave her an encouraging nod. "Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, United States Marine Corps," Admiral Patterson announced, "please come to the front." The blood drained from Maria's face as hundreds of eyes turned toward her. Fellow service members began pointing in her direction, and she realized she had no choice but to stand and make her way to the front of the auditorium. Her legs felt unsteady as she walked down the aisle, acutely aware of every step she was taking. When she reached the front, Admiral Patterson gestured for her to stand beside him at the podium. Maria positioned herself at attention, trying to maintain her composure despite her complete bewilderment about what was happening. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," Admiral Patterson said, his voice warm but authoritative, "I understand that earlier today you made a comment about senior officers not knowing that enlisted personnel exist. Is that correct?" Maria's face flushed with embarrassment. "Yes, sir. I apologize for any inappropriate comments, sir." Admiral Patterson smiled. "There's nothing to apologize for, Staff Sergeant. In fact, your observation demonstrates exactly the kind of honest perspective that we need more of in military leadership. You expressed a concern that many enlisted personnel feel but are often afraid to voice." The Admiral turned to address the entire auditorium. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez has served 8 years in the Marine Corps with distinction. She has deployed to Afghanistan, led Marines in combat operations, and consistently demonstrated the leadership qualities that make our military strong. But, more importantly, she has maintained the courage to speak honestly about her experiences and the challenges facing our enlisted force." Maria stood frozen, completely unprepared for this turn of events. She had expected at best to be forgotten by the end of the ceremony, and, at worst, to face some kind of disciplinary action for her casual comments. "What Staff Sergeant Rodriguez doesn't know," Admiral Patterson continued, "is that Admiral Chen, Admiral Thompson, and I have been discussing the importance of recognizing outstanding enlisted leaders. We've been looking for an opportunity to demonstrate that senior leadership does indeed see, value, and honor the contributions of every service member, regardless of rank." Admiral Patterson then did something completely unexpected. He turned toward Maria and rendered a crisp, formal salute. The entire auditorium held its breath as one of the highest-ranking officers in the United States Navy saluted a Marine Staff Sergeant. But the surprises weren't over. Admiral Chen rose from his seat in the front row and also saluted Maria. Moments later, Admiral Thompson stood and followed suit. 3 of the most senior naval officers in the country were standing at attention, saluting a Marine Staff Sergeant who just hours earlier had joked about them not knowing she existed. Maria's military training kicked in, and she returned the salute with the precision and pride that had been drilled into her during years of service. But, internally, she was reeling from the magnitude of what was happening. The auditorium erupted in applause as the 3 admirals completed their salutes. Service members of all ranks rose to their feet in a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Maria stood at attention, tears welling in her eyes as she absorbed the significance of the moment. Admiral Patterson waited for the applause to die down before speaking again. The United States military is strongest when every service member, from the newest recruit to the most senior officer, feels valued and recognized for their contributions. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's joke about us not knowing she exists gave us an opportunity to demonstrate that we do know, we do see, and we do appreciate the sacrifices and dedication of our enlisted force." He turned back to Maria. "Staff Sergeant, your service record speaks for itself, but it's your character, your leadership, and your willingness to speak honestly about the enlisted experience that makes you exceptional. Today, you represented not just yourself, but thousands of enlisted personnel who serve with the same dedication and professionalism that you've demonstrated."
Admiral Chen approached the podium. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, I started my career as an aviation electrician's mate. I remember feeling exactly the way you described feeling invisible to senior leadership. What I learned over the years is that great leaders are always watching, always evaluating, and always looking for opportunities to recognize excellence." Admiral Thompson also stepped forward. "I began as a hospital corpsman, and, like you, I sometimes wondered if my contributions mattered to anyone above my immediate chain of command. What I want you to know is that your contributions do matter, your leadership makes a difference, and your voice has value at every level of our military." The three admirals then presented Maria with a special recognition award that had been hastily prepared during the break. The citation read, "For exceptional leadership, dedication to service, and the courage to speak honestly about the enlisted experience. Presented in recognition of 8 years of distinguished service and as a symbol of the military's commitment to recognizing excellence at all levels." As Maria accepted the award, Admiral Patterson leaned in and spoke quietly so only she could hear. "Your joke about saluting us gave us the perfect opportunity to salute you. Sometimes the best leadership moments happen when we least expect them." The formal presentation concluded, but the impact of what had just occurred rippled through the auditorium. Service members from all branches were talking excitedly about what they had witnessed, and many were taking photos and videos to share with colleagues who hadn't attended the ceremony. Maria remained at the front for several more minutes as officers and enlisted personnel approached to congratulate her and share their own stories about feeling invisible or undervalued in the military hierarchy. Many told her that seeing the three admirals salute her had given them hope and renewed their faith in the military's leadership structure. Commander Mitchell was among those who approached. "I had a feeling something like this might happen," she said with a smile. "When I saw how passionate you were about enlisted personnel feeling valued, and when I knew about the admirals' backgrounds, I suspected they would find a way to make a statement." As the crowd began to disperse, Maria found herself in a receiving line of sorts, shaking hands and accepting congratulations from fellow service members. The ceremony had officially ended, but the conversations and connections sparked by the recognition continued for another hour. Admiral Patterson remained nearby, and, as the crowd thinned, he approached Maria for a private conversation. "Staff Sergeant, I want you to know that what happened today wasn't just a gesture. Your perspective and your leadership potential have been noted, and I suspect this won't be the last time you find yourself in front of senior leadership." The Admiral handed her his business card. "I want you to stay in touch. The military needs leaders who can bridge the gap between enlisted and officer perspectives, and you've demonstrated that ability today. Don't lose that honesty and that willingness to speak up for your fellow service members." As Maria finally prepared to leave the ceremony, she reflected on how dramatically her day had changed. She had arrived feeling invisible and undervalued, made a casual joke about senior leadership not knowing she existed, and was leaving with a special recognition award and the personal contact information of three admirals. The irony wasn't lost on her that her comment about the admirals not noticing if she saluted them had resulted in three of the most senior naval officers in the country standing to salute her. Sometimes, she realized, the military hierarchy works in ways that are completely unexpected, and true leadership recognizes excellence regardless of where it originates. The days following the ceremony brought changes that Maria could never have anticipated. Word of what had happened spread quickly through military networks, social media, and news outlets. Videos of the three admirals saluting the Marine Staff Sergeant went viral, generating millions of views and thousands of comments from current and former service members around the world. Maria's phone rang constantly with interview requests from military publications, news outlets, and podcasts.
Everyone wanted to hear the story from her perspective, to understand what it felt like to go from feeling invisible to being recognized by some of the highest-ranking officers in the military. But, the attention, while overwhelming, was just the beginning of how that moment would change Maria's life and career. Within a week of the ceremony, she received a call from her commanding officer, Colonel James Wright, requesting an immediate meeting at his office. "Rodriguez," Colonel Wright began as she entered his office, "I've been fielding calls all week about you. Apparently, your little joke at the ceremony has caught the attention of some very important people." Maria shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, I never intended for any of this to happen. I was just making conversation during the break." Colonel Wright smiled. "Relax, Staff Sergeant. You're not in trouble. In fact, quite the opposite. I have some interesting news for you." He handed her an official-looking document. "This is a letter from Admiral Patterson's office. You've been selected for a special assignment that will involve working directly with senior leadership on enlisted personnel issues." Maria read the letter in disbelief. The assignment would involve traveling to various military installations, conducting interviews with enlisted personnel, and preparing reports for senior leadership about the challenges and perspectives of the enlisted force. It was essentially a formalization of what she had been doing informally through her comments at the ceremony. "But, sir," Maria said, "I'm just a staff sergeant. This seems like the kind of assignment that would go to a senior officer or someone with advanced education." "That's exactly why they want you," Colonel Wright replied. "They don't want an officer's perspective or an academic's analysis. They want the honest, unfiltered perspective of someone who has lived the enlisted experience and can articulate it effectively." The assignment would last 6 months and would take Maria to Marine Corps, Navy, Army, and Air Force installations across the United States and overseas. She would report directly to a joint committee of senior officers, including Admiral Patterson, who would use her findings to inform policy decisions about enlisted personnel issues. As Maria began her new assignment, she discovered that her experience at the ceremony had resonated with enlisted personnel throughout the military. At every installation she visited, service members approached her to share their own stories about feeling overlooked or undervalued. Many said that seeing the video of the admirals saluting her had given them hope and had changed their perception of senior leadership. Her first stop was Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton, where she conducted focus groups with Marines of various ranks and specialties. The conversations were eye-opening, revealing issues that she had experienced herself but had never fully understood were systemic problems affecting thousands of service members. "I've been in for 12 years, one gunnery sergeant told her during a private interview, "and I've never felt like my input mattered to anyone above my immediate chain of command. Seeing what happened to you made me realize that maybe there are senior leaders who actually care about what we think." At Naval Station Norfolk, Maria spoke with sailors who described feeling like cogs in a machine, valued only for their ability to perform specific tasks without any consideration for their ideas or perspectives on improving operations. But, the conversations also revealed that many enlisted personnel had never been asked for their input and had assumed that senior leadership wasn't interested in their opinions. The Air Force base visits were particularly enlightening. Maria discovered that the issues she had identified were not unique to the Marine Corps or even to sea services, but were common across all military branches. Enlisted personnel in the Air Force described the same feelings of invisibility and disconnect from senior leadership that she had experienced. During her time at Fort Bragg, Maria interviewed Army personnel who had served in the same conflicts she had experienced. Many shared stories of battlefield innovations, process improvements, and leadership insights that had been developed by enlisted personnel but had never been communicated up the chain of command. "We know what works and what doesn't work because we're the ones actually doing the job every day," one Army staff sergeant explained. "But nobody ever asks us. They just expect us to execute whatever decisions get made 3 levels above us." As Maria compiled her findings, she began to see patterns that went beyond individual complaints or isolated incidents. The disconnect between enlisted personnel and senior leadership was systematic and was resulting in lost opportunities for improvement, decreased morale, and reduced retention of experienced service members. Her reports to the Senior Leadership Committee were detailed and honest, reflecting the same directness that had gotten her noticed at the original ceremony. She made specific recommendations for improving communication between levels of command, creating formal channels for enlisted input on policy decisions, and establishing recognition programs that would identify and promote exceptional enlisted leaders. Admiral Patterson read each of her reports personally and often called to discuss her findings. During one of these conversations, he shared something that surprised Maria. "Staff Sergeant," he said, "your work is confirming things that we suspected but had never had documented so thoroughly. For years, we've known that we were missing valuable perspectives by not effectively communicating with our enlisted force. Your assignment is providing us with the data we need to make real changes." The Admiral paused before continuing. "But, more than that, you've become a symbol for enlisted personnel throughout the military. They see you as someone who spoke up and was heard, and that's inspiring others to believe that their voices matter too." Indeed, Maria began noticing changes during her later installation visits. Commanding officers who had heard about her work were implementing their own programs to gather input from enlisted personnel. Some bases had established regular forums where enlisted personnel could share ideas directly with senior leadership. At Marine Corps Air Station Miramar, the commanding officer had instituted monthly breakfast meetings where he personally met with randomly selected enlisted Marines to discuss their experiences and suggestions. "Your story made me realize that I had been so focused on officer development that I was ignoring a huge pool of leadership potential," he told Maria. Similar changes were happening at installations across the military. Word of the Admiral's recognition and Maria's subsequent assignment had created a ripple effect, encouraging senior leaders to examine their own practices and find ways to better connect with their enlisted personnel. But, perhaps the most significant change was in Maria herself. The assignment had forced her to articulate not just her own experiences but the experiences of thousands of service members. She had developed skills in research, analysis, and presentation that she never knew she possessed. As her 6-month assignment neared its end, Maria received another unexpected call from Admiral Patterson's office. This time, it wasn't just about extending her current assignment, but about a permanent change in her career trajectory. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," Admiral Patterson said during their final meeting, "your work over the past 6 months has been exceptional. More importantly, you've demonstrated leadership qualities that the military needs to cultivate. I'm recommending you for officer candidate school." Maria was stunned. The idea of becoming an officer had never seriously occurred to her. She had always seen herself as an enlisted Marine, and the thought of crossing over to the officer corps felt overwhelming. "Sir, I'm honored, but I'm not sure I'm ready for that kind of responsibility." Admiral Patterson smiled. "Staff Sergeant, you've spent the past 6 months traveling the country, analyzing complex organizational issues, and presenting findings to senior leadership. You've been doing officer-level work while maintaining your connection to the enlisted experience. That combination is exactly what the military needs." The recommendation came with a guarantee that if she completed officer candidate school successfully, she would be assigned to work on enlisted personnel issues at the Pentagon, essentially continuing and expanding the work she had been doing. As Maria considered this opportunity, she reflected on how much her life had changed since that moment at the ceremony when she had jokingly complained about senior officers not knowing she existed. Her casual comment had not only brought her to the attention of senior leadership but had opened doors to opportunities she had never imagined possible. The irony wasn't lost on her that her journey from feeling invisible to being recognized by admirals had come full circle. Now she had the opportunity to help other enlisted personnel feel heard and valued, to bridge the gap between enlisted and officer perspectives that she had experienced firsthand. Whether she chose to pursue the officer path or continue her enlisted career, Maria knew that her perspective on military leadership had been fundamentally changed. She had learned that great leaders do notice, do care, and do act when they encounter excellence, regardless of where it originates in the hierarchy. Her story had become more than just a personal journey, it had become a catalyst for change throughout the military. And, as she prepared to make her decision about the future, Maria realized that sometimes the most powerful leadership moments begin with the simplest observations and the courage to speak honestly about one's experiences. The three admirals who had stood and saluted her that day had not just recognized her individual contributions, but had demonstrated a principle that would continue to influence military leadership for years to come: that excellence deserves recognition, that every voice has value, and that true leaders never forget where they came from.